My name is Nicholas Kiaya. Before we begin formally, because there's still a lot of people at lunch, if we could take a moment for everyone that's here, just to take about 10 seconds to just introduce yourself. I think it will be more effective for the panelists so they know who works in the media, who doesn't work in the media, what your respective interests are. And if we could begin with this gentleman here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jarul Kotchapun. I'm from the Ministry of Education.
Hi, my name's Loshana. I'm a journalist with The Star.
Quite from Sinchu Daily and from General Desk.
My name's Emily. I'm a writer with Personal Money magazine at The Edge.
Hello, my name is Muhammad Afifuddin Mazwali from Road Safety Department.
Hi, Andy Bayani from the Jakarta Post, Indonesia.
Afternoon, Mary Chen from Challenges magazine, a publication that focuses on disability advocacy.
Hi, my name is Eric Liu. I'm from Wollongong University, Australia, former Malaysian.
Harumi Gondo. I'm with UPI Next, which is the Media Development Division of UPI, United Press International.
Michael Marshall. I'm the Director of Communications for the Global Peace Foundation and Editor Emeritus of UPI.
Arthur T. from the Information Department.
I'm Alifuddin. I'm a student of University Indonesia, second semester.
Hey, my name is Hapsari Kusumaninggia. People call me Hap Hap. I'm from Indonesia, and I have just got internship at Kyoto News.
I am Robert Wong from Ministry of Federal Territories Indonesia.
Hello, I'm Shreda Marisa, Same Department, Road Safety Department of Malaysia.
Hi, I'm Susanna Muhammad Dahan from Malaysian Palmer Council.
Okay, we'll just we'll wait maybe one more minute, okay? My name is Nicholas Kiaya. I am a human being, like everyone else here in the room, and then we all have titles. I am currently the president of UPI, United Press International, and as Harumi Gondo mentioned earlier, UPI has a media development arm called UPI Next. And media development is basically the development and strengthening and empowerment of media practices throughout the world, and especially in regions where, and I think from my experience in the industry, every region of the world has various challenges in effectively working as a journalist in the media. For those who did not participate in the session this morning, we'll recap that shortly, but before I do that, I'd like the panelists, first of all, their bios are in the program, but I'd like to give them a minute or two just to introduce themselves and highlight aspects of their background important for this discussion.
Hello, my name is Zaid. I'm a blogger. I write quite regularly, and I'm interested in the subject and of press freedom and the quality of journalists that we have. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. My name is John, K.A.J. John. I am not a blogger. I write a column. I insist I'm only a columnist. I've been writing for 8 years with Malaysia Kini, weekly, except for these 2 months, November and December. I'm taking my sabbatical, self-imposed sabbatical. I was in public service for 32 years, and I'm fighting for all the things I did not see happen in the government.
Hi, my name is Bob Teal. I went into journalism before the invention of handphone. I'm a senior columnist in Sinchu Daily. Thank you.
Before we begin, I just wanted to recap first the earlier session because for me, the biggest takeaway from that session, how many people were in the earlier session today? Anyone? And we had print journalists and broadcast journalists. And broadcast journalists are, in my experience for journalism, they're much more demonstrative in their telling of a story. And we really could see that. I could see that in the panelists. But first and foremost, journalism is about facts. It's about getting the facts right. And it is so telling that I was thinking about it today, just about Nelson Mandela. How this is a man who, if people did not have the facts right and the background right, what a different world and what a different story they'd be telling with his passing. Journalists play such a profound role in their providing facts and getting the facts right. I was recently with a colleague from Lebanon, and he said to me that he was at a conference in Washington, D.C., at Georgetown, and a very prestigious, internationally known journalist who, I won't mention his name, but he basically said, someone asked him, so when you were in Beirut during the last bombing exchange that went on there, and forgive me, I don't remember the exact year, were you scared? And he responded and said, not at all. He said, the Israelis have very, very, very surgical bombing. He said, and I just knew that they would hit their targets. Well, my colleague is Lebanese, and he waited till the end, and then he stood up and he said to him, you do agree that the most important aspect of a journalist's work is getting the facts right. And he challenged the journalist. He said, you failed to tell this audience that 1,800 civilians were killed, and they were all civilians, and only 5 soldiers were killed. He said, I'm not so sure that's very surgical. So I use an example not to be partial to one side or the other, but just the subtlety of facts, how critically important that is. In this session, what we are focused on is the specific practical question of how can journalists be protected so they can do their job well? How can journalists be protected so that they can tell the facts? Because sometimes, as like I said, when I first stood up here, I said, first and foremost, I'm a human being. For everyone that's a human being, I think we all admit that sometimes the last thing we want to hear about ourselves are the facts. We have good things about ourselves, and we have things that we have to examine. Journalists play a very unique role in our society, and they're both loved and hated. They're targeted. Some consider them adversarial in telling the facts so that an informed public can act responsibly in the society. What this session is focused on is how journalists can be protected so they can do that job well. And what we're looking at and starting out as a presumption here is that to do their job well, they have to work from a set of journalistic ethics, a canon of ethics, a canon of core values that they recognize and they see are not violative, that they have to figure out how to carry that out. So in addressing this question, each of our panelists have been involved in this question and have proposed different solutions to this problem. I'd like to begin with our first panelist, Mr. Bob Teo, to provide us some background on this question with respect to Malaysia and this region.
Thank you, Nick. First of all, I'd like to record my appreciation for being invited here by the organizers of this convention and also by UPI Next. I find this an honor, a privilege to be here and to share some thoughts with you. In the earlier session, I was very impressed by Maria Resa's Rappler, the technology-driven the news structure that she and her colleagues have set up. Having said that, the future of journalism, the way forward, may be driven by technology, but it is not necessarily defined by technology. I think what it is defined by is by this question: what is journalism? What is good journalism? We have to go back. The future of journalism, we have to go back to the basic of what journalism is about. And I think by and large, journalists will agree that the first obligation of journalists is to truth. And we owe a responsibility to the public to be truthful. I think we are defined simply by that. And of course, by many more things that what we call a code of ethics. In the pursuit of truth, journalists have an obligation to exercise a personal conscience. So it comes back to what Nick says: I'm a human being, I have a conscience. I'm defined by my conscience, my profession is defined by my conscience. Okay, exercising conscience is easier said than done. We cannot afford to continue to leave our conscience outside the newsroom every day we come to work. We have to bring our conscience into the newsroom. This is because, from the principle of individual conscience, are the values of journalism flow. Fair reporting, factual reporting, verification of facts, a commitment to our readers and communities, and ultimately to a free, ethical, and responsible press. This is what defines journalism. So we have had a lot of problems earlier in this morning session. So where do we go from here? I think we need to be guided by a framework of ethics. We need an ethical framework. I would suggest that having an ethical framework is not good enough. This code of ethics must be enforceable. Okay, I would suggest that we need a workplace reform. We don't need more laws. We need a workplace reform for code of ethics to be enforceable. And this is to be accompanied by what I call a conscience clause into the contracts, employment contracts, or the collective agreements between journalists and media owners. And a breach of ethics by parties is a breach in terms of the terms and conditions of the journalists. So any breach is now considered a breach of employment contract. So that is enforceable by existing framework of labor and industrial law. So we got a handle on. It is not simply something nebulous or in the air. It is not something an ethical code, but it is a term, part and parcel of our employment contract. So this can be enforced through existing industrial mechanism, and there is no need to have to introduce any more new laws. There is sufficient law to enforce this code of ethics. And but having said that, the real problem is not applying employment laws. It is not per se, but by self-regulation, by the industry and practitioners themselves. Ethics, after all, cannot be legislated. It must be etched in the hearts of those who profess the ethical conduct. The conscience clause itself is not new. It's about more than a century old now, having first made its start in Italy in 1901, I think. And the first time the word conscience clause was entered into a collective agreement, again, was in Italy in 1919. And in Malaysia, the National Union of Journalists in Malaysia tried to introduce that conscience clause into the collective agreement, and that was referred to the Industrial Court in 1985. Unfortunately, the time was not right for the idea, and the court threw that idea out, and since then, no more claims have to be made. But recently, following the scandal at the News of the World about the phone hacking, you remember that? And that led to the inquiry under Lord Levison in just last year, and the conscience clause came back into fashion. And it came back to fashion, so much so that after the inquiry, Lord Leveson himself suggested there should be a conscience clause because journalists are not adequately protected. Okay, and IFJ, the International Federation of Journalists, actually by and large they are the biggest federation or trade union of journalists in the world, nearly half a million members they have all over the world. They incorporated this into their ethical framework. And I'll read it out to you. A clause of conscience, they call it. Journalists must have the right to act according to their conscience in the exercise of journalism. In case of fundamental change in the political, philosophical, or religious line of the employer, a journalist may put an end to his or her contract without notice and be paid compensation, equivalent to what he or she would have received in case of termination of his or her contract by the employer. In that case, you can walk out. If there's a breach of the conscience clause, you can walk out as if you have been sacked unfairly by the employer and claim compensation thereof. The IFJ clause says that no journalist should be directed by an employer or a person acting on behalf of the employer to commit any act or thing that the journalist believes would breach his or her professional ethics, whether defined by a code of ethics adopted by the journalist, collected at national level, or that would infringe the International Code of Principles for the Conduct of Journalism as contained in the IFJ Code. And no journalist can be disciplined in any way by asserting his or her rights according to their conscience clause. So that is very clear. I think that is adequate protection, which is none right now until the Leveson inquiry that proposed this clause, and IFJ took it out. Okay, there's another way of looking at looking for a solution is what we call in Malaysia and many countries the tripartite arrangement. Since the establishment of the International Labour Organization in 1919, that has been a feature of ILO in a tripartite arrangement between governments, employers, and employees in terms of defining what is the workers' right, the rights in the workplace, and how to enforce it. So that tripartite arrangement in Malaysia, for instance, way back in 1975, the government, the employers, represented by the Malaysian Employees Federation, and the trade unions, represented by the Malaysian Trades Unions Congress, came out with a tripartite arrangement called the Code of Industrial Harmony. This code is not legally binding, but it defines what is good for industrial harmony, and it's an obligation of parties to that tripartite arrangement to keep peace and harmony in the workplace. So that was in 1975. Now, nearly a quarter of a century later, in 1999, again, this tripartite arrangement came into place. It's called the Code of Conduct for the Prevention of Sexual Harassment. This, again, is not legal binding, but at least it defines what is appropriate or inappropriate behavior in the workplace in terms of sexual harassment. So this now, what I heard, that many cases have been brought to court, sexual harassment in the workplace, because of the outcome, the introduction of this Code of Prevention of Sexual Harassment. And this code, including the earlier one, Code of Industrial Harmony, has now been incorporated into almost every collective agreement that has been signed between unions and employers. For those who have not, for instance, the Bar Council, when there is no collective agreement, the employers themselves, the Bar Council themselves, incorporates this code into the employment letter. Before they employ anybody, it's in the letter to let you know that you are protected against sexual harassment according to this code of conduct. So although it's not legally binding, there is now a definition of inappropriate behavior and action to be taken thereof. Similarly, I would suggest that a code of conduct for a code of ethics can be put into place by a tripartite arrangement between the employers, the journalists, and the government. And likewise, it need not have to be legally binding. But now, at least we know that the code of ethics is part and parcel of our employment contract. Plagiarism is not acceptable in journalism. So if the journalist plagiarizes, he can be dismissed on the grounds of this tripartite arrangement. Okay? But if the employer, the media owners force journalists to do something like phone hacking, for instance, like the case, it is against the code of ethics, and the media owner is liable or can be liable, although it's not legally binding. But now what happens is now, it can be a dispute. It can be a trade dispute. Whereas in the past, ethics, so what? It's your ethics, not my ethics. But now it is recognized. Tripartite arrangement recognizes as ethics. It becomes disputable. It can become a claim for dispute, and it can be referred to the usual industrial arbitration mechanism, labor department, and eventually to the industrial court, and even to the civil courts if the outcome is not necessary. Is what the journalists would want or what the employees would want. You can go appeal to the High Court and Court of Appeal and even Supreme Court. So now there is a legal mechanism that can protect journalism in the workplace. And so now we have two approaches, a bilateral one between the employer and the journalist, a national one, which is a tripartite arrangement, the government, the employer, and the journalist. And I will even go a step further, and it could be a regional one even, because a code of ethics is almost it's something that nobody can disagree with, whether it's in Indonesia or in Philippines or Malaysia. We can agree to a code of ethics. It's a commonality. That is a common base for introducing an ethical framework. So this reform can actually take place across borders. So we will also see what is happening in the Philippines. Why in the Philippines can journalists be protected in a manner far better than Malaysia? Now we ask the Malaysian government, why are we not doing this? So it can be a regional, we open up extra windows, and it can be indirectly affects and enhance the level of protection within countries in the region. So now, the time has come for this idea to take shape. But the question is, who is going to bail the cat? Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to really acknowledge my gratitude to UPI for even inviting me. I don't claim ever to be a journalist, but I write to express my view, but I dare not be a blogger yet, because my emotions sometimes get carried away, so I always protect myself, allowing a bunch of editors to protect me. And that's positive protection, but I put some conditions with anybody I've written for. You only have first right of refusal. Second is the IP belongs to both of us. Third is no censorship, other than language or grammar and stuff like that. You censor my content, that's the last day I'm writing for you. And so far, the grace of God, but I've had first Zaid's good friend, Abdullah Kolanas, when he was the managing editor of NST, allowed me to do, but he said only verbal, no, nothing in writing. But since then, Stephen and Prem have allowed, and I have some email correspondence to at least firm up. My point is I negotiated that. Why did I do that? It all started with me being in public service. I once reported on a boss through internal mail. I reported on a boss who had taken $4,000 in payment from giving lectures in Defense College. And I asked the question of the registrar of Intan, are we allowed to take money like this during office hours? Because we already paid as Intan lecturers. I was posted in Intan. That sent me on a journey because he marked me down and he took action, and I missed my promotion that once time. Now I realize, my goodness, I had poked the hornet's nest. But that led me to my doctoral work on dignity in the workplace. Okay, I did, and I was fortunate at George Washington University in DC. There's a professor, Said Hussein Nas, and he told them, get off this guy's back. He's trying to argue something that's useful for Malaysia, because in Malaysia, they have 5 principles. First one says belief in God. So he is trying to create an ethical framework for him to work in the workplace, and you shouldn't say the secular sacred divide and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's a long story cut short. That's the reason. And I've been writing for the last 8 years premised on this perspective and worldview. So what are the things I'm interested in? And I'm going to propose that is actually my summary from my doctoral work. I'm going to propose that as a framework for us to think about. There is truth, and none of us will debate what truth is. Whether you call it public interest or public integrity, as Eric used the phrase this morning, there is truth out there. I don't want to use a controversial word called Allah. Joke intended, okay? Because the word has become controversial in Malaysia. Actually, it's not, okay? But we make it controversial. So, but that's talking about truth, okay? That's truth. On the other, if you build a triangle in your minds, the other part of truth is I'm a journalist or I'm a civil servant. How do I engage with truth? Is there a limited dimension to truth? Is it only truth when I'm in the workplace? When I go home, it's not truth? You introduce yourselves human being. If there is no truth outside a workplace, then in the workplace you are only a human doing, and at home you are a human being. I'm just using another way of saying the same thing you just said. Okay, so journalists have that struggle. Then, is that the whole picture? It's not. Actually, there's a thing called a workplace, which is the third part of the triangle. Now, what is the workplace? We call it, when I was in public service, we call it government service. If you are in a media organization, you say, I'm University of Wollongong, or you say, I'm in Star, I work for Star. Somebody said that just now, okay? That's an organization. Now, if you put the 3 together, we have all the concoctions of this issue we're talking about. And what are the issues? It will address issues of what is truth, and what is the perspective of truth on each of the 3 points of the triangle. And whose values define truth. I have many times in my column said we don't breathe green air. God knew what he was doing when he made air colorless. But sometimes in some spaces you feel like you are in green space. Okay? And you feel a bit claustrophobic. That's not intended to be. So values, whose values? And at the end of the day, human beings are designed to live a life of both dignity and destiny. Very important 2 words. Dignity, I achieve full human potential, whatever the plan. And of course, we are celebrating the man who just passed, who lived a life of full dignity and destiny, I would dare say. Nelson Mandela. Because he walked tall, even though he spent 27 years in jail. And especially because he spent 27 years in jail, he could come out with a heart of forgiveness. How many of us can do that? I mean, I quarreled with my wife, still haven't forgotten some of those small quarrels, okay. So how to make this big, huge thing, 27 years, carrying bricks to one end, the other end. I mean, I have not been to South Africa enough to visit the place. I've been to Joburg, but not been to the prison. But I have friends who visited the actual prison and tell me that was just carrying bricks on one end. And he had to train himself not to have negative attitudes. So that is what we are potentially able. But unfortunately, we are caught in this bind. We as journalists, I'm now going to call myself a journalist just to fit with you all. You are called to fair and accurate reporting, which was defined as facts. Then you have journalistic ethics or conscience. the conscience clause that Bob talked about. The difference between human beings and animals is that animals don't have a conscience. Okay, so they can get into a debate over whether animals have soul, no soul. We can get into that debate, but surely not human conscience. They don't know between right and wrong. I watch this whisperer now. This what do you call it? The dog whisperer. I watch the program because my son is interested in animal science. And he's the youngest boy. I have 5 children, and I told them no pets in my house. So we never had pets, and he wanted to do animal science, maybe out of spite. No. Okay, so I decided to watch. He said, Dad, you watch this, you will love animals. So I'm watching Animal Whisperer, Dog Whisperer. And what do I learn? I learned one important lesson. Dogs don't remember the past. They don't remember the past. They live in the here and now only. And that tells me they have no conscience too. Okay, so, second. Then the third. This one, let me talk a bit more because this is an important area. We covered some of these issues earlier. They are owners, right? They are media owners and they are media managers. Sorry, those of us who are editors and sit in the editorial room and you protect yourself and think that you're only editors, you're not part of management. You are part of management. Because you carry managerial policy sometimes. So recently, I started writing with Malay Mail. Okay, last Tuesday, I had my first column out after a break of so many months, after my good friend Terence moved on, and then I didn't know who is now running the show. I have to deal with editors, otherwise I cannot write. And I have to meet face to face and agree on the ground rules, otherwise I cannot write. I'm not motivated to write because I always feel I'll be abused somehow. So I was chatting, and then he said, yeah, but you know we have some unwritten rules. And he actually spelled them out. I listened, I said, well, unless I have reason to pick on those rules, I'm not going to address them. But if I have to, I will. And here's the first right of refusal, which is one of my conditions. If that happens, I put it on I have a Facebook Truth Matters column, a section. So I'll put it on my Facebook. So what's the big deal? I carry on. I'm not going to be cowed by all these kind of things. Okay, but I understand that businesses where I think of the bottom line, but I only encourage them, don't just think of the bottom line, also think of the top line. Now, what do I mean by the top line? Stewardship is a responsibility assigned to human beings for all of nature. It's a stewardship responsibility, not a use and dispose responsibility. It's a stewardship responsibility. So when I teach sometimes on integrity, I define integrity as the first 10% that you give away in a company, not the bottom 10%. Too often companies give the last 10%, then look for orphanages to go and have a photo opportunity. You don't believe in the worldview of man and nature, the spiritual crisis of modern man by Said Hussein Nas. Buy and read the book. It's a very simple, thin book. But it talks about a worldview of stewardship. So it's possible. Now, if you put all the three together, I'm sorry I didn't do my homework and develop a PowerPoint or something. But if you put the facts, ethics, and media organization into a triangle, there are 3 factors that define in the middle, okay? The first is public integrity. Who protects public integrity? There are words like, when I was in government service, they said, but this is national interest. I was not smart enough then to say, but what is national interest? Is it different than public interest? I was not smart enough. Now I think I know a bit better, okay? Then there is a thing called community interest. Yesterday in the UMNO General Assembly, they're debating whether Satu Melayu or Satu Malaysia. Okay, it's talking about whose interest comes first. Valid question. We have to think it through. But public interest cannot be reduced to community interest. Public interest is bigger than even national interest. I don't have time to cover, but there are 7 major stakeholders of public interest. Another day, another time, we can talk about it. I want to go to the second one. The idea of national interest. In our national land code, there was an amendment made which said that in the national interest, the government can acquire land. What happened? Those who are as old as I am know, Manlung and all the Johor land was acquired by the government and then abused. And then Tun Mahathir went back and changed it back to public interest from national interest. So these are not just words, by the way. National interest can be defined by the government of the day. Public interest, there are other parties, including Agong and others, if you go into big issues that need to be consulted. Then the third issue is community of sectoral interest. In this world today, we're breaking down into smaller and smaller community-based groups. We can't help it. Yesterday I was walking in Taman Aman in PJ and I met a friend, he introduced me to another friend, and then this guy, Arul, said, KJ, you and the other guy are both Malayalis, so speak Malayalam. Okay, for those of us who think they're only Indians, now you open up and say, well, they're Malayalis and they're Tamils and they're Telugu speaking people and they're etc., etc., etc. So there are 14 languages, I'm told, in India, recognized as major languages. So then there is subgroups, which is ethnicity, I also had breakfast with a good friend, Bakar Sulaiman, 2 days ago. He wrote a book called Sensitive Truths in Malaysia. And he wanted to borrow my copy of the book called Contesting Malayness. It's not my book, it's published by NUS, ICS, Contesting Malayness. And the whole book is about who is a Malay, who is not a Malay. It's a big debate going on among the scholarly in the world. And here we reduce everything to a bunch of letters. And we think we've solved the problem, okay? So, complex issues. Now, what has all that got to do with journalism? Some of us got together and decided to put all of this. After the last elections, we were very upset with media ethics. I won't quote anything specific, but a lot of media violated a lot of rules, and people like me stopped buying newspapers. And a campaign stopping buying some newspapers because some serious violation of media ethics. And false advertising, actually. I would call it false advertising or misleading advertising. Okay, one more minute. So we put together and tried to see what was the problem with media in Malaysia. We came out with 4 factors that contribute. One is ownership. Because ownership is limited to certain groups and selected people groups and parties and etc., etc. But that is a win in the court recently. Malaysia Kini has been told to be instructed Home Affairs Minister to give a license to Malaysia Kini. I'm happy for Malaysia Kini. I write with them. I don't write for them. I write with them and they don't pay me. I refuse to accept payment. That's my part of me keeping my part of the bargain. Second is the legal control to conform. We still have the Printing and Press Act, which is the framework for abuse. In fact, that's the same framework that's being used to abuse even the word Allah. I'm a committed Christian. I take it seriously, this word. It predates Islam. It predates even Arabic. I've done my homework. But the judges in the appeal court didn't seem to have done their homework. And yet they drew some conclusions. So it's going to federal court. We don't need to debate it. Third one, currently media organizations all have a short-term perspective. That's why when recently Malaysia Kini started their building campaign, I started telling everybody, go and buy a brick, $1,000 a brick to help put up a building for. Because we need independent media organizations. And to be fair, the University of Nottingham did a study in April for a 1-month period, from April 7th to May 7th. And they reported that mainstream media very overtly, biasly reported for BN parties against Pakatan parties. And the worst culprit they recorded is Bernama. I wish I could have raised the issues this morning. Anyway, finally, there is a concern, there is a quality in the media education. Standards are dropping in media, and partly I think it's linked to language. I was shocked to hear that Bernama couldn't find, but if you keep saying we are a government organization, you'll never get people, okay? They are not government. I pay for Bernama as a rakyat, So they start thinking themselves an independent news agency, which does some work for the government, but not everything for the government, With that, I'll take a stop here. Thank you.
Knows these issues, and they know the issue of there being a legal question about the use, who has the legal right to publish the term Allah. And it is a current legal controversy in Malaysia at this time. So I just say that to keep all this in context, because we're looking from multiple perspectives here. One with a very concrete proposal about how to protect journalists. Our second speaker looked at more broad principles and ethics related to it. And I hope our third speaker will have great insight and pull all this together. With that, I introduce Saeed Ibrahim.
Good afternoon. This subject is obviously an important one, and I think this conference, this meeting here in Malaysia is very timely, because Malaysia, as you know, is a great country, but it has some serious flaws. And in one area that I want to talk to you is this area of press freedom, the area of where we should have a better sets of journalists, better sets of laws, better sets of code of ethics, better sets of owners of the media. I don't know what's our ranking, but I'm sure it must be low. And I'm sure for a country of our potential and our strength, we don't deserve to be ranked so low. Just like our football team should be ranked higher. We don't deserve that. We are in the first world league. And yet you look at the journalists, or you look at the press today in our country. We're still going to court to answer the question whether the government can refuse a permit to publish. In other countries in this world, there are no more countries like that, except North Korea maybe. We still have to get a permission to print, to publish. Of course, the case is coming up at the highest level. Chances are good that the court will say, yes, you don't need, or rather the permission should be given. But that's where we are now, a very basic level. That's one. Number two, I admire journalists. When I was young, when I was growing up, I remember this Vietnam War very vividly. This massacre of My Lai massacre. And I remember this guy, Seymour Hersh, I think his name, this journalist, American investigative journalist, how he exposed this great cover-up of the killing, indiscriminate killing of civilians in Vietnam. And it took him a lot of pain, a lot of abuse, a lot of threats. And Seymour Hersh persevered. And as a young man, I thought, this is great. But I didn't have the skill to be a journalist, so I ended up being a lawyer. But that's another thing. But I admired people like that, courage. And you have seen many more journalists all over the world who gave their life for this honorable profession. I can tell you, there are many names in India, Indonesia, or even here at one time. They took it seriously. And I always tell my son, if you want to do something, you better be serious about it. You must like it. You must want to do it. Otherwise, do something else. You don't be a journalist to take orders or to be cari makan, we call it in Bahasa Malaysia. You be a journalist because you want to do the right thing for the community, for the people. You want to convey the right information. You must have that strength of character. So to answer the question, what is the best protection for journalists? It's themselves. Only society can protect them, the people, but they must be worthy of protection. They must stand up. Because otherwise, do something else. Be a corporate lawyer, whatever. You know. And I, this is the point that I want to make as far as Malaysia, in the context of Malaysia, and I'm sure we live in a time of a great extremism now. You know, I have lived long enough in this country to see that we are getting worse. It's not nostalgia I'm talking about. I'm talking about people cannot even say something without offending somebody else. It's crazy. We live in an extreme time. Religion has become, well, people tell me, oh, people have become more religious now. I say no. Because religious people are tolerant. Religious people are peaceful. God-fearing people never do harm. Mandela is a religious man. I am a religious man, but a lot of people don't think so. But, yes, but people use words like that. Oh, in Malaysia now, we are more religious. It cannot be. We heard accusations, we attack people, we are angry about the smallest thing. You know, we don't want to talk. You look at the Facebook, you look at the remarks they made against me. You know, look what Ibrahim Ali said about me. He says, Zai is drunkard all the time. You know, he drinks 24 hours a day, you know. Well, but that is from a Muslim leader. You see, and we have other examples. I don't want to bore you. But what I'm trying to say is this. We live in an extremely delicate, sensitive time. Extremism is on the rise. In Malaysia, it's just not between Christians and Muslims, you know. I mean, in Myanmar, it's Buddhists and Muslims, you know. And in Indonesia, it's Muslims and Muslims, you know. And in Malaysia, it's Muslims and Shia and Muslims, you know. I mean, the permutation is endless. So what, in this challenging time, it's more important you have the right kind of journalists. In a peaceful time, in my time when I was young, maybe less, you know, the demand is less on journalism, I don't know. But especially now. You know, you cannot write something that, oh, we might upset somebody. And I mean, I know Bob to talk about conscience clause. I think it should be the right conscience clause. I mean, it's a difficult question. Because you can be motivated by something that you call conscience, but it's all totally wrong, totally dangerous. I'm sure a lot of fellows who kill somebody else. You know that guy in England who killed that army officer? He said he did it because God asked him to do it. It's his conscience. So I'm very wary about this thing. You know, I think we should be guided by ordinary principles of good behavior. Let's start with that first. Let's be truthful first. Let's be fair. I know fairness you can argue, but at least there's some idea of what is fair. Fair is this. If you were to do it to me, would it be okay? Would it be fair if the same thing that I ask of you, you do it to me? If you pass that test, then you're fair. So I think journalism in this country needs that. Certain codes. But it's difficult to enforce because the top leadership sometimes don't understand fairness, or don't understand or don't want to implement it, don't want to teach the people. It's more important you win the election. You must, the leadership principle must start from the top. The newspaper owners are owned by politicians, you know. I mean, the newspapers are owned by politicians, you know. So if politicians don't have the right values of fairness, how do you expect the newspaper editors to be fair? And then it goes down. How do you expect the journalist who has to do his work inculcate, assimilate the same values? It's difficult. So I would say what this country needs for the best protection of journalists is that higher-ups also accept these principles and the right values for the country. And not for some esoteric reason, no, not for some moral. It's a practical tool. When the country is guided by the right values and the right principles, you get the people to be happier, more productive. You don't spend time arguing over nothing. You address the problem of society, you move the nation forward. So I'm not talking about some, moral dimension to this. These are practical issues. If journalists be allowed to do their job, then there will be less corruption, there will be less. The reports of the Auditor General will be thinner, the machinery of government will be more efficient, the right people will be promoted, everybody wins. So, but why are we not doing it? Because, for the moment I think, because we tolerate this nonsense. So I would urge the journalists, you start first. You want protection, you want respect, you must do your job properly. And I think that is very, very important ingredient. I would like to propose, if it is all possible, I know this code of ethics, I agree with Bob and John, and I think it should be done, and it should be embraced by the top leadership. I hope you people go and see the Prime Minister and tell him to initiate it, and everything will be done. But also, I think you should have an index for this country. This country loves index. Every time, of course, they will only talk about the good ones, like ease of doing business. Oh, we are better than Indonesia, so they talk about it. We are better, we're just slightly lower than Taiwan. And then, of course, there's index for transparency. Then, of course, we are not so good, so they don't talk about it, And then, of course, the index for corruption and so on. But whatever the response, they care about what people think. So I would propose that we have index for our newspapers. I'm interested to know how would Utusan rank vis-a-vis Kompas. I would be interested to know how would Bangkok Post compare with Jakarta Post. I would be interested to know how's Utusan and the Star compared to the Singapore version of the Straits Times. Because if you measure these papers by those yardsticks, the criteria that are accepted and established, and it doesn't answer all the questions, it doesn't tell all the stories, but at least, if our newspapers rank somewhere below Myanmar Times, then something's wrong with the country, surely. They've got 69 years of military rule. So we cannot compare with Myanmar, we must compare with, So I feel there should be an index. And then my last suggestion, do I have enough time, Nick? I have, okay.
Minus 1 minute.
Okay, I would like to suggest, I sense that in Malaysia context, okay, although you have unions, Bob, you correct me if I'm wrong. You have unions, you have groupings, but they're not active. That's what my feeling. I'm not a journalist, I'm just a blogger. But I would like to see that you have some pride in your group, your work, your friendship, your camaraderie. If you are not going to defend yourself, what protection do you want? So I was, it's kind of sad that, there was this he was the president of this union of journalists, the Malay fellow, what's his name? Wata. He was abused, he was sacked, he was left. He was the president of the journalists of this country. And he was sacked. He was humiliated. They threw nasi lemak at him. And what is the response? Zero. I had coffee with him. I couldn't do much. I could buy him coffee. But it's pathetic. Here you have this honorable group of people, profession, and do nothing when one of your kind get treated that way. What has wrong with our country? Oh, at least our journalists. So, I would like to end on that note. You must treasure this profession, this journalist. journalism, you must want to protect it yourself. You must want to make it better. And for your own self-worth, you must want to make it the best that you can give for the country. Because you're on a mission. Otherwise, sell nasi lemak or do some property development, do whatever you want. But if you want to be a journalist, be true to it. Thank you very much.
Before we turn to some questions, I just would like to give some perspective from someone that's not from Malaysia, from the United States, just in terms of that there's a universality in the challenges that are faced, but they're in different contexts. And the context in Malaysia is clearly different and distinct from the context of telling the truth in the United States. A big question that comes up that I realize is, in the name of health and safety, governments sometimes censor. Is it always wrong? Is it an evil to censor? Is there a common set of core values? The last recommendation was to create an index. It is very valuable to create an index. Humanity absolutely needs an index. Is it the Quran? Is it the Bible? Is it, I'm not sure what else it could be, but they're the Bhagavad Gita, yeah? There has to be some fundamental set of core values that transcends ethnicity, that transcends race, that transcends nationality. And very sadly for the state of humanity, it seems to be that the common denominator is pain. How much pain can we tolerate before we change? And journalists certainly play a role in this, because journalists play a unique role in exposing and telling the story of how painful a situation might be. And most of the time, I think the public, someone that works in the media, is basically walking asleep. Just walking asleep, and somehow there's some catastrophe that occurs, and suddenly people are awakened, and hopefully they change their course. So there are certainly idiosyncratic challenges here, like the use of a word. In the United States, the extreme is that if you use the word God, it's a problem. It's a problem in the workplace. There are efforts to exclude reference to the word God. In the United States, there is the Pledge of Allegiance. There is an effort legislatively to change the pledge in the country to remove the word God because it's offensive to non-believers. So we can split hairs here all day, and there are merits to each of the proposals we've heard so far. Having a conscience clause is a good idea. But I ask the audience, perhaps we can engage you in terms of questions or even answer this question. Well, what are the core values that should guide a journalist so they're following their conscience? As Zaid said, that people motivated by conscience, I think it was you that said that, right? That they've committed heinous crimes. And they say, yeah, I would do it again because it's the right thing to do. So what are the inviolable core values that should guide a journalist? If this question can be commonly recognized and understood, journalists certainly have a role to play, and a role to play in exposing good and exposing bad. And in the earlier presentation, with the use of technology, it was quite inspirational to see that there was a way for people to tweet and to post and to help to find loved ones that were missing or lost because of what was going on in the Philippines. So I open it up, framed by this, with that question in mind. Does anyone have any questions related to this or a proposal? With what measure shall you index the media? That is a question, actually, I asked to each of the panelists.
I believe you already have that, the code of ethics that are applicable to the journalists, don't you have? Like a federation of journalists?
From what I understand, and perhaps Bob or Eric can speak to it, different publishers adopt different codes of ethics. There's not a universal code of ethics. Is that correct, Bob?
I just want to say that in Malaysia there is actually no code of ethics of any effect, okay? You have the one, National Union of Journalists, where I was there before. We introduced a code of ethics which was adopted from the International Federation of Journalists. But it remains a code and it does nothing and says nothing. In fact, most journalists are not even aware there is a code. And then we have the one by the National Press Institute, which actually is drafted by the National Press Institute on behalf of the so-called proposed National Press Council. So it remains in the air and the proposal. It's a 4-page long, single space, as long as the one of the International Federation of Journalists. Okay, the International Federation of Journalists is quite comprehensive, which we can look at. And if you ask any young journalist entering the newsroom about a code of ethics, they will say, what ethics? Nobody taught them about ethics. What ethics, you know? So that's where we are at now. I think so for a start, we must at least tell everybody there is a code of ethics. And we must tell our readers there is ethics. We don't have to wait till the cows come home. Each media owner, each media outlet, a newspaper, for instance, my paper can say, henceforth, we have adopted a code of ethics. This is our code of ethics, and this is our promise to you, the reader, that we will try our best to keep up to this code of ethics. That can be done on a unilateral basis. Then we wait for the, what they call, for the critical mass to form, then we can have a national code of uniform ethics.
Any other comments from the panelists on this one? No?
Yeah. So I think I'm not sure of the exact process, you know, because I'm not in the industry, but I'm sure if you can have an index for all these other more difficult issues like corruption, transparency, you know, that surely press all over the world, including press in this area, the region, the media, they have common core process, you know. So I suppose newspapers that follow as closely as possible to those, you can allocate points, and then those who flaunt it or breach it regularly will get very 0 points. So I just feel that there has to be some measure, because this is the time of in our life, in our history, where everything has to be measured. You know, and the press is such an important component. If you don't measure it, at least by some independent source, you know, obviously, if you ask Bernama to measure itself, of course, you know, it's not very accurate, but you have an independent sort of panel. I think that would be good for the country.
So I raise this point again and challenge everyone here in terms of this code of ethics. If there's multiple forms of it or it doesn't exist, you have to have a point of reference to index, and you're totally right. We need we need a standard so we can rank in terms of reporting, and it is a industry-wide global issue. There certainly are probably different models that are working well or better than others, but there's commercial censorship by and large. In most countries where there's total free expression, you can say whatever you want, but it is the dollar or the currency controls what's reported and what is not reported. But if you look at the Constitution, there's complete freedom of expression. You can say whatever you want, but I will only pay you if you talk about how good I am. So the publications talk about how good you are. A question for the panelist is, because this came up earlier today, do you believe, given the circumstances today with social media and the fact that, and it clearly came out in our earlier session this morning, and I can tell you at UPI, I've seen it in the workforce dramatically. If you skew between 25 and younger, the consumption of news and the perception of news is almost opposite people that are 30 and older. They have a total different sensibility of how they process information. So how they report, how they perceive reality, how they use technology is very, very, very different. So the real fundamental question is, do you believe that journalists have an authoritative voice or role in this process of disseminating information? I ask that to you, Bob, because you're the journalist at the table.
Yeah, I think first of all, we had to be very clear when we talk about the media. For me, the media has three categories. The mainstream media, that is old media. The new media, people like Rappler, Malaysia Kini, they are new media. They are the online newspaper. They follow the same principles, okay? Except that technology and platform is different. Then we have the social media. That is not journalism. That is social media. Okay, they are a work in progress. How are you going to monitor them, regulate them? That is a work in progress question. It is for social media, for the stakeholders to decide what to do. Okay, but new media should be subject to the same stringent ethical framework as the mainstream or the old media. There's no difference. If you're running an online newspaper, you have that responsibility. You owe that obligation to your readers. Okay, so that is very straightforward to me. So that's my response.
Any other comments?
Yeah, let me add. Recently,
I don't think it's on.
Recently, hello, yeah. Recently, the last column I wrote in Malaysia Kini in October, I uploaded it on my Truth Matters Facebook page. It was really rhetorically reflecting on the question, have we all shamed Islam? I mean, I was brave. At first, I didn't want to publish it. By some accident, it got published, okay. And I was including myself because I'm a student of Islam. I am a serious student of Islam. So, it was up on Facebook, and I'm going to just tell you a folklore version of what happened. A dialogue started in social space. I had created this Truth Matters section. Fantastic dialogue. And it was actually among a few Malay intellectuals. And then it became a bit sensitive, and somebody began asking somebody else, have you studied the Quran? And among Muslims, okay. Technically, I'll still come back to be the administrator when if the thing gets out of control. I still have the. So I chipped in because the guy asked the lady, have you studied the Quran? I just told the guy off, who was actually my classmate. I said, you're not being fair to the lady. What do you assume she hasn't read the Quran? It's another Malay lady, And I told him who she is really. Immediately then, it went offline, and he began texting me. And we carried on our conversation. Last time we met, we hugged each other. Okay? So nothing untoward happened. But the point I'm saying is, social media does not have yet a modicum of how you do editing and how do you do moderating and how do you do tempering, because it can get out of control. Because some of them are using rather offensive language, which Dr. Zaid just now mentioned too. So social media is a completely different cup of tea, I think. But in the case of mainstream and internet in Malaysia is, I think from the Nottingham study, not I think, I know, they found that internet media is the most objective in reporting on both sides of news. I mean, the two parties, okay, in Malaysia. And premised on that, I think the idea of building an index is brilliant, actually. I would like to move that motion forward and say we should consider. In fact, I have another crazy idea that I yesterday said, and I told Dato Paul Chan, who happened to be a Vice Chancellor, you help. I said, Dato, I have a crazy idea and I want to work with you. I said, let's have a Mandela Index of Leadership. Give Mandela 10 points, and then we'll grade everybody else. You know, and then we all exchange notes on who will be getting, and then he said, you're very generous. We were talking about the same person. He said, I won't even give half what you gave. So I mean, it creates an opportunity for a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to add about this social media thing. I'm a blogger, so I'm in social media, right? I'm not in the internet, right? Okay, that's why I'm interested in the subject. I think social media is very important. Of course, at this point in time, it's difficult to get quality. You know, it's not always easy to get people to use the proper language, to be factually correct. You know, there are all kinds of people in this world, of course. But I see tremendous potential if only we can harness this social media. Because I remember, you know, in the United States, you know, they had this lady, Huffington. Yeah, I think she's done very well. She's done very well. And I think she started merely by aggregating and organizing good so-called journalists or citizens journalists, or whatever you call it, social media commentators, but good ones. And she is very influential now. Even politicians are scared of that side now. They have to take the views into account. They are very good, very responsive. So I think it's a question of organizing it. News media, social media, whatever media now is very competitive. And that is why, I come back to my first point, the traditional media, the journalists, you set the example, you set leadership, others will follow. And then you create this massive influential group of people that can change society and country. And I think social media is just the next level. I mean, it's a bit disorganized now, but I think it's a question of time before John will come out with something brilliant and get some brave, good reporters like Bob to get together, and maybe we can get a more effective social media mechanism. That's what I'm saying. Don't ignore it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add? So it's,
I'm a journalist, so I control you, and you cannot speak.
Okay, I want to talk about the.
No.
I want to talk about the proposal for indexing. I think that's a good idea, and it can be done. It can be done. Okay, for instance, we take the code of ethics, an established code of ethics that everybody agrees that this is the code of ethics for Malaysia. Okay, for instance, one of the code of ethics would be plagiarism. Okay, we are against plagiarism. So we index it. We look at the papers, complaints about plagiarism against papers, style, right? We index it. Okay, how many times in a year have complaints been made against you on plagiarism? That's one. Fair and accurate reporting is also a code of ethics. Okay, how do we measure that? We can measure at the occurrences of corrections. Newspapers put correction. Our story yesterday was wrong. So that could be, but of course, some papers don't even bother to correct themselves. And that is the problem. Then we have privacy, respect for privacy. We look at the number of defamation cases that newspapers have lost. Okay, I mean not filed, because sometimes they are unreasonably filed. Okay, it must be filed, heard, and judgment handed down. So okay, Utusan will take the prize, I think, for this. Okay, so that can be if we use the code of ethics to rank it. It's difficult, but can be done.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. It's very refreshing to hear independent-minded journalists, which we don't often very see in the mainstream Malaysian media. So I'm very happy to learn from my new colleagues. I just have a couple of points to raise. One is, you talk about Myanmar, and then you talk about ranking Malaysia and Myanmar. I have bad news for you. If the ranking was carried out, I think Malaysia would be behind Myanmar. No, seriously, because Myanmar or Burma, they have freed their press. In fact, I think in April they issued dozens of new press licenses. I mean, it's still by licensing, but they actually allow more freedom. In fact, if I had a Malaysian journalist friend who went through the new regulations, they said, "Oh my God, they are ahead of us." In terms of the regulations, but I think in terms of the professionalism, I think Myanmar is still behind. I mean, they need to catch up. They need to get out of this fighting mentality, because at the end of the day, once they actually have that freedom, they have to work like real journalists and not, bring their own agenda. But I think the question of ranking is important. We're going to have an ASEAN Community 2015, right? I think that would be a good idea to push this idea of ranking the media across the 10 countries within this new community, and ranking the journalism, ranking the code of ethics, or even ranking the different newspapers, publications, TV stations. And that way, I think, would create a kind of competition that, of course, Indonesia would be better than Malaysia, or Malaysia would be. we always have this rivalry, Indonesia and Malaysia, for the reason because we are very much close in terms of our roots and all those things. But I think on the second issue, the code of ethics, code of ethics is if you can come up with one set of code of ethics for the whole all the journalists, that will be a good basis for you to push the government that the idea of self-regulation. If you have one set of code of ethics that everybody in the profession agrees. And then because I was surprised to hear Bob talking about two-party or three-party, in negotiating code of ethics. I would assume that code of ethics is something that we all sit down together and say, okay, what are the values and principles that we should be governing our professions, and then if you can sit down together and come up with one set of code of ethics, and then you don't have to go to the government, but this is something that we have agreed. And if it's credible, I'm sure there will be a lot of support from the public, from the audience, and the government will have difficulties in saying no to this new code of ethics. But I understand in the context of Malaysia, I think the challenge is more to do with the ownership of the media. But again, it's something that the news managers have to fight and convince that for the sake of the profession, the credibility of this, the media itself, this is something that they have to go for. Thank you.
Amen to that idea.
I'd like to respond to Buyani. Yeah, this code of ethics, we need to have that, and we don't have to wait for to be top down. I have suggested these ideas to many editors that we can start right now from where we are, that we have our own code of ethics and we form our internal ombudsman for complaints by readers against us. So this is independent ombudsman, but internal. We have a lawyer, we have whatever, and then we address that issue. Okay, internal. So we got anything about our coverage, complain to us, and internal ombudsman. And for your information, Bernama, the National News Agency, actually has an internal ombudsman. Not many people know. He has met, I think, twice only. Okay, ever since it was established. Not many people know that you can complain to the National News Agency and he will convene his own internal ombudsman and come out with an answer, whether you're right or you're wrong. Okay, so if many papers establish their own internal ombudsman, then there will be a good start. But the response I get is that, look, we have enough problems, okay? Don't bring more problems to our doors.
I'm not sure in Malaysia if this is the case, and I bet it is for certain professions. There are certain professions that they are licensed, and they weren't necessarily licensed by the government. a professional association was formed, and that professional association built up credibility as if you're part of this association, you have the highest standards to be respected. It might be something that you want to consider here, so you have an association that recognizes publications and an association that recognizes someone as a journalist. That can include academia, it can include professional journalists, across the whole gamut of journalists, bloggers that become honorary journalists because they are, corroborating their facts before they publish, that they ascribe to this core code of ethics that I don't plagiarize. Before I report a fact, I have to do a second and third sourcing of that fact to confirm that it's accurate and true. I think if you have that kind of universal standard, and then you create an association that's regional, and you said it already exists here, to build on what already exists here. Any further suggestions or questions from the audience?
Let me just ask a question. Because the panel is made up of a former lawyer and a former professional public servant, right? Assuming that the standard code of ethics of the common shared values that you talked about, assuming that we have a model with the details to be worked out later, is there a mechanism in the Malaysian context to see that these common core shared values being enforceable? Let's say if a journalist breaches one or two conditions, what are the punitive measures that can be taken? Because many code of ethics, as we know, they are there. Global media code of ethics, they are there. But we see journalists breaching it all the time, but there is no punitive measure.
Take a shot at it, then Dato can, because he's a lawyer and they have the Bar Council and they already have the mechanism within the Bar Council. But I'm not a lawyer, I'm more the Australian pronunciation, a liar. No. Back to public service. I think Bob's idea of going to ask the Ministry of Human Resources under their industrial relations system to create another code along the lines of women's issues now, that's a very plausible. I think the trick here is not to do it publicly. The trick here, nature of life in Malaysia, is go and tell the minister and say, sir, you can table the idea, I'll give you all the support. Say it's your idea, it'll get tabled, okay? And that's the way to sell it. But if you write to the paper and make a big noise, then they won't take up your idea. Unfortunately, that's the way life sometimes gets done. So I think that's doable. But for formal Bar Council, there is a law that qualifies. The Medical Council has got a law that qualifies, and so on and so forth. So those are legal provisions that historically the so-called traditional professions have got laws. Recently, some of us got together because of the last election and the round. So we have actually tried to see what is the legal recourse to do it while waiting for all the other things. And let me just say that this is not yet public, but I'll just share it in this room, that we have actually tabled, some of us who are working on it, have tabled a paper to Suhakam, which is the Human Rights Council, under this argument that our freedom to know truth has been violated. Because if information is more disinformation and misinformation than actual information, then we're not hearing truth, The freedom of expression is being violated by the lack of ethics. Now, how do you put a stop to this? And human rights, you're giving us rights, right? Freedom. So we're in dialogue with Suhakam, okay? And they were very positive in admitting us and willing to talk it through. So hopefully somewhere along the way we'll have good news. Okay? They're willing to look at how they can do it using the existing law of the Human Rights Council.
Yeah, I think my guess is that the government knows that the control that they used to have will have to go at at some point. And I think, therefore, there is this recognition that you might as well regulate it properly. So I think it would not be far-fetched to think that they will find your ideas acceptable. If you, as John says, take it at the right channel, make it look like it is for their own good, and so on and so forth. Because you see, I think it's easy to have this code of ethics. You can take it from whatever sources you have. When it comes to enforceability, you must have something like a commission, a press commission, that has parliamentary, or rather that has legislative force. Only that commission can then say, okay, Utusan or Berita Harian, you're out of line on this issue, you'll be fined for so much, or the reporters will be reprimanded, or the editor will be, Only a press commission enacted pursuant to an act of parliament can address this issue. But I would suggest you take one step first, because they get excited when they get too many steps. Get the code first. And then they will realize, I think, that for that to work, you need enforceability. And when I was a member of parliament many years ago, this is my favorite topic, this press freedom and so on and so forth. And when we make I was, of course, at the government side at that time. So there was a high level of tolerance at that time. And then, so they came out with this something, you remember this press institute, press, all this media council. I said, no, this is not what we want. We want a press commission. We want something with a real authority. But it never got past that. And I think that is because there's not enough external pressure, I think. In this country, everything external is good. Cars external is good. Cosmetics good. Everything external is good.
Why from a foreign country?
Good. And that's why ranking from an external source is good. So the pressure has to come from organizations beyond just the local journalists. And I think this is the right time, because my sense is that they will lose on this issue of the Malaysia Kini printing, the right to publish. I think they will lose that case in the federal court. I get a sense. Yeah. So I think once they lose that, there's a bit of momentum on the side of press freedom. Take that opportunity.
And I just want to add to that, to follow up with that, and especially, this is really a question, and I hope you won't be shy and you'll speak up. For those who are 30 and younger, and mindful of the Arab Spring, mindful of technology, do you believe that you need a top-down structure to enforce this truth-telling, or you think from the grassroots through technology up, truth comes out? It's a question. Please, some of you respond to it. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Iskandar from Malaysia. Right. In regards of the Arab Springs and all that, you see the chaotic versions come from that. Is that for Malaysian context, you have to understand, when powerful people have interests, why should they let you speak when they gain something? Simple as that. And for the Arab Spring, is that when it becomes so intolerable that the youth comes out and see that when at the start it was beautiful, it was peaceful, it was awesome, and I was intended to go there just to see the seaside. But what happened then? The momentum was unregulated because they weren't professionals. They don't have the experience. When amateurs do things too big, it can cause harm. Right, just so that.
Thank you. Anyone else on this?
I'm sorry, my name is Hapsari. This is out of context of the youth and the upper generations, but I want to ask about truthfulness and what should media have said in context to the relations of other countries. I point out of what the issues of Indonesia and Australia were happening lately, and the Tony Abbott said that the Guardian, the ABC, and Sydney Morning Herald, and so forth has gone too far and tell the the wrong stories or and so forth. So what kind of any information that the media should provide to the people, so it also provide the goodness, not only the the chaotic situations. I'm as a youth in Indonesia, not out of context from Indonesia relations. I saw that the media lately just provided negative sentiments toward our relation toward Malaysia. And how do you respond about that? Thank you.
I think one thing about freedom, one thing about free society, you're going to have all kinds. You cannot always hope that everybody will be responsible, everybody will be sensible. You cannot. That can only exist in a very authoritarian where they have set guidelines. So obviously, Indonesia is a democracy, so you're going to have some people that who will sensationalize more, who will highlight issues that you don't think they should. It's a matter of judgment. So I think you have to live with that. I think this is part and parcel of a free society. Having said that, I think freedom has responsibility, of course. You must be responsible to the country, to the population, to the community, and that is when I think if you have that strong sense of responsibility, I don't want to go into details, but if you have a strong sense of responsibility, you wouldn't do things that you know will hurt a lot of people. Even the best thing you can do is not to say anything. I mean, that is in itself an act of, responsibility. So I think if you can have a balance between freedom and responsibility, I think you get it right, and I'm sure you get it right. It's always difficult. It's always difficult. Even in America, the land of the free, so-called, you have this contestation, between powerful vested interests and abusing the freedom. I mean, if you look at Fox Channel and CNN, you can tell. They'll tell the same thing in a different way. But you cannot avoid it. It is something that we have to learn to accept. But I say that because I think it is also a process you have to go through in building this democracy.
We have just 10 minutes left to this session, and the objective of this session is to come up with some type of concrete action item. Before we jump to that, is there any last-minute questions that we could just quickly address?
So this is my boss, so you can cut me off if it's not relevant, especially in view of time. So Datuk Zaid, no, you can really cut me off. Datuk Zaid, you were saying, you really need to get the support of the local journalists, right? And I think we have an interesting crowd here. I mean, it's a younger crowd, the majority, and for people who are trying to make a name for themselves, right? There's been a lot of talk about code of ethics, but for the younger people who are still trying to make a name, is it relevant? Is having a code of ethics, I mean, a standard code of ethics is that something that comes up in your daily lives? Is there a need to have these conversations for you? I'm curious.
Maybe just in the interest of time and my editorial power here, just a show of hands in terms of this focus and this conversation. How many people here in this room believe that as a starting point for this process, because we've talked about ranking, we've talked about a professional association, we've talked about governmental regulation, as a starting point for that, how many people here believe that there needs to be some type of uniform or broadly recognized standard that journalists must adhere to in terms of their ethics, such as not plagiarism? So a show of hands for those to follow Harumi's question to think that is a relevant point that needs to be addressed. Are you convinced now?
No, but I have a follow-up question to that. So in terms of those people that raise their hands, I mean, in theory, it's good, right, to have this code of ethics that someone's going to put together, but it's going to be a lot of hard work. is your hand, I mean, behind your hand, is it like you're willing to put in the effort to put this code of ethics? Like, how strong is your...
Self-regulation is
Sorry?
self-regulation. You must self-regulate what you believe in. Yeah? You can't just say anything you like. You must think first.
I beg to differ. For a younger person who have objectively just want to be new, to gain position, anything is okay unless there's an enforcement. When there's no one who's going to act, why should I stop?
As a practicing journalist, I wish to disagree with that. I think when you start out to write the first form of story, when you angle the story, it is the journalists themselves who decide first, okay, this is how I'm going to write my story. Then I'll give it to the editor, and then the editor decides. So if I choose to write this particular angle and leave out that angle, my editor is not going to know. Well, at least until someone else carries that angle, and then he asks me what I'm going to do then. So the fact here is, I believe that as a reporter, I am very, very junior, but I believe that at any given time when I write the story, I have the power to decide this is not how it's going to go. So I make the call first. And then if the editors think, no, this is not right, can you angle it like this? And I don't believe that, I will do whatever I can to convince them, no, this is not how it was said, this didn't happen. And I believe that if you have that maturity and that level to explain it to them, they will listen to you.
And this is a very good example of the situation that we are going through.
Can you turn your mic on?
Application of the constitution clause. Yeah. You heard me, right?
No.
Okay, that's it.
Well, I can't help it, but I'm first a lawyer, so I like laws. So if you ask me, I think you have to start with some uniform, standard code of ethics, otherwise it's too subjective. So if we all agree, would we like to make a... Yes, that too, but first, a resolution here as an action item from this session. If I can find my notes here. Sorry. To form a regional coalition of existing journalism organizations that are already in place, and that it's in the, how do you say it, ASEAN? ASEAN community, to adopt a uniform code of, you can even make it more broad, core shared values by ASEAN professional journalists. All those in favor of such a proposal?
Where did the thing come from? ASEAN. Okay, can I just make a comment on this regional? I've been involved in this for a long time, starting from the Confederation of ASEAN Journalists. Once you have an organization, once you have a structure, and then you bring in everybody, and everybody has to be recognized, then it becomes a bureaucratic NGO. Mm. And some people, frankly, are not qualified to be there, are there because simply they belong to a certain organization. So it's better to have a regional body comprising of people who have a passion, okay, who are in the profession or related to a profession and have a passion to see ethical journalism being practiced, journalism with a conscience. So we give room for people who are really, who should be there. And we don't want to bring in people who shouldn't be there, but they are there simply because they belong to some media organization.
I agree and want to propose that we don't call it an organization but a coalition. Call it a coalition, that makes everybody equal.
Coalition.
Coalition of journalists, stroke bloggers, stroke writers, stroke da-da-da, who are interested in ethical journalism. Start like that. I mean, it's broad enough. Everybody can. And you can use the word ASEAN. ASEAN just means 10 countries. For us in this part of the region, ASEAN means 10 countries. We know who the 10 are. And there are some observers, but this is ASEAN 10. But if you mean to link it, otherwise, it'll just get broader and broader and out of control.
Yeah, I just want to add what John said. I think from my experience, I not as a journalist, but as a parliamentary. Yes, when I was in parliament, the issue then was democracy for Myanmar days of Aung San Suu Kyi, for example. There were ASEAN organizations, all other things. So what we decided is we got a few members of parliament from Malaysia, and then we checked with Singapore parliamentarian, a few there, Indonesia. We got together and in Bangkok, until we kept on talking about the same thing over and over and over. I think it has some effect, I think. And similarly, you take the right people from Indonesia, from journalists, from Philippines, who are committed to this sort of thing. It's better than roping in existing structure and trying to, discuss, or rather trying to decide who's doing what. Just get committed people who wants to see press media freedom in this country, in this region. And I think that would be effective. A small group. We had a committee of about 8 of them. And something like that. That would be a good start.
So is that your motion? So just to reframe it, there's a resolution to form a coalition which will function as a committee, a small committee of those with the passion for journalistic ethics and an interest in codifying those ethics. So are you one regional? A regional coalition.
Oh, it has to be grounded. You need to be regional.
Okay.
The question is whether it's ASEAN, Asia, or bigger. No, I think you stick it to ASEAN, limit it to ASEAN for now.
Yeah, when I just mispronounced it, I was always saying ASEAN, not Asian, ASEAN. It's too big.
Excuse me, I think for a start, we don't want to be so specific and define it. Just regional for
call it a regional.
Not as ASEAN, then we are supposed to bring in people like Singapore, whom I don't like. Just say regional coalition.
Okay, how about if we do this? Since we're not a legislative body, and we can do whatever we want, right? Social media, freedom. I will leave this here, and all those with the passion for journalistic ethics, who will put, as Harumi said, who will put their energy and life energy behind their hand when they raised it. If you will please sign a list on this list of your name and your email address, and then UPI next, and my colleagues will follow up with you with action items. How's that? Does that work? Okay, thank you all very much.
Can I say one last thing? Because I was talking,
The women always have to have the last word.
So, I was talking to Maria Ressa yesterday. I mean, I would consider her to be a successful journalist. And she was telling me a little bit about, things. And she was saying, 80% of journalists in the Philippines are corrupt. And, in terms of her organization, she's successful. I mean, in 2 years, she made Rappler.com the 3rd most visited online news site. And she was saying her organization is 100% clean of corruption. And that's very admirable. And I was asking her, how did you do this? How did you make it Rappler what it is? One thing is she doesn't sleep. Right? Another thing is that she works with best journalists. But the third thing is that she lives by and she's driven by principles, these to uphold these standards of journalism. And so, I think that core is what drives her and what's made her very successful. So I see the need for this. I mean, for you young journalists as well. I mean, to live by that.
So what is your email address? Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Yes, Eric.
I think before we go, I'd like to also propose that, assuming that the resolution goes through, what is the follow-up action? So I propose that maybe all of us here who are interested meet again sometime early next year. We'll communicate with you for another meeting. And I was wondering whether UPI Next is open to sponsoring the meeting, or?
UPI Next is open to, where's my wallet? Sponsoring the meeting. And again, I certainly have a passion for this. That's why I'm here. And that's why we partnered with Global Peace Foundation, because what is in common between UPI and Global Peace Foundation is we really believe that fundamentally there has to be universal core values that govern whatever the problem is. Humanity's got to come together. So the answer is yes.
But UPI, Nick is from the United States. I'm in Tokyo. We need the local journalists to be behind it. So yes, please, if you're interested, please put your email here.
I'll leave it right here.
Right, thanks. If I may just make a comment. There are two things here actually. When we talk about code of ethics, I think we're actually looking at personal, in a personal context. And that comes, and that is where we look at professionalism and the future of journalism, for the younger journalists. But I think we also we're looking at setting up an index, a benchmarking, what is good or what is good practices and so forth. I think those are two issues, two separate issues. I think maybe having an index whereby we actually benchmark and actually measure one another against one another, that may be actually a good start. Whereas code of ethics, building that up, perhaps it starts with education, because our university, in terms of mass communication, do not actually put that across. I don't know, I mean, this is just my suggestion. When we say we come up with a common code of ethics, yes, we can say plagiarism, we can say truth, we can say integrity, but how do you monitor on a personal level? I mean, we actually, when we do stories, we actually come up with our own personal perspective, and it's actually quite easy to stereotype and to actually be discriminating without realizing it.
Personally, I don't see a conflict. The index is completely different. Okay, and to do an index is not an easy thing. I'm willing to work with Dato' Zaid and a few others. Some universities are quite keen on this. Work on towards an index. Okay, let's take that separately. But this code of ethics, I think is important to get started. How you actually translate, I think the 8-person committee can work that out, the details. If you have a deep interest, then you should sign up and get involved, because that's the only way to contribute.
I think what is important now is the starting point, to have that code of ethics, and the follow-up we can talk later.
Yeah, because I think that in order to index or benchmark, you need to come up with a common agreement about here's the standard. Because you're measuring against the standard so you can create the index. So what is the standard?
It's like the ruler. You need the ruler set, and then you can measure.
So I think we're talking about the same thing, but it's step by step by step. For example, if the journalism schools, if academia in the region and in Malaysia, they recognize that before we give a diploma to someone and say you're a journalist, this person has demonstrated their understanding and commitment to a standard. Well, what is that standard? And it must already exist, as you said. It's not that there are many holy scriptures. This is the journalist holy scripture that has to be codified. Let's not go there. It'll be another 5-hour session. Thank you very much. Please sign up. Thank you. Thank you. A big hand for the panelists.